Greetings, Dr. Palumbo here, and in this video we're going to take a look at manufacturing costs. We're going to see the three costs of a manufactured product and how they all interrelate with one another. Now, if you're in a merchandising operation where you're just buying and selling inventory, it's rather easy to figure out how much your inventory costs you. But when you're manufacturing something, you're making it from scratch, it becomes a little bit more complicated. So let's see how that works today, or at least get started on how that works today. First of all, I want to put up a factory. I like drawing pictures, so there's our factory with a little smokestack on it. And today, factories have become the F word. They call them manufacturing facilities, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along. So the first thing you're going to need is raw material. And let's put that out over here. RM for raw material. It's also referred to as direct material. So raw material, direct material, they go hand in hand. And let's say we're making, I don't know, furniture. We're making wooden furniture, custom-made wooden furniture. So for us, raw material would be things like a wood, oak and pine, cherry, mahogany, teak, whatever we're making it out of. And things like the hinges and gliders if we're making something like an entertainment unit. And very often that raw material is out here someplace in a separate warehouse or separate storage from the rest of the factory. Now if you've ever driven down in the Jersey Turnpike, you'll see plenty of raw materials out there in the right outside the factory, barrels of chemicals and things like that. Raw materials could be as boring as sand and gravel if you're a cement company, or as exciting as diamonds and rubies and emeralds if you're somebody like Tiffany's. So that raw material comes into the factory, and what happens is there's a material requisition form. One of the people who's going to actually work on it says, we need so much raw material, we need this many board feet of this type of wood. So that's how that gets into the factory. Then we start to apply direct labor. Now, direct labor are those people who actually physically work on the product. So if we're making furniture, that would be cabinet makers or carpenters, I don't know the exact term for them, who are working on it. As opposed to indirect labor, those are the people who are working in the factory but don't actually make the product. So that might be the person who's operating the raw materials bin. It could be the supervisors, it could be maintenance people who keep the equipment running, janitors, all sorts of indirect labor. We'll talk about that in a minute. And the last and third cost that we have is, and I call it factory overhead. Again, you might hear it called factory burden or manufacturing overhead or manufacturing burden. Again, they're replacing factory with manufacturing. So that's our third cost. And factory overhead is all those costs of operating the factory. It's heat, light, power, insurance on the building, real estate taxes if we own it, rent if we're renting it, supplies, all sorts of things that you can imagine that have to be spent when you're in there on the factory. So these three then become what we call manufacturing costs added. Manufacturing cost added. Added to what? That's the question. Well, let's say this is July, and we're looking at this for the month of July. On June 30th, when the whistle blows and the factory closes at 4 o'clock or 4:30 in the afternoon, what happens is there's still goods on the floor that are neither finished products just yet, yet they're no longer raw materials because we've begun to convert those into a finished product. So that's work in process. Right? Now, that's on June 30th. When I open a factory up on July 1st, I still have that work in process sitting on a factory floor that needs to be finished. So we'll add beginning, that's a sloppy looking, there we go. Oh, that's even worse, my bad. Beginning work in process. Okay. And these become, we can take a subtotal, or sometimes they're called total manufacturing costs to be accounted for. That's a whole lot to write on the board. So we're saying is we have all these costs. We have what was sitting on the floor when we started. We've added all this. Where do I get my direct labor from? My payroll. Where do I get my factory overhead from my general ledger accounts? So I've added all these other costs this month. And now where are they? Well, they're in one or two places. Hopefully they've been completed and they're shipped to the finished goods inventory, or they still remain on the factory floor. So if we subtract out ending work in process, that gives us cost of goods manufactured. I hope you can see that down there at the bottom of the board. And these are the items that go to our finished goods inventory. And of course we have paperwork on all of that, where things are coming, where they're going to. So those are the three manufacturing costs. You got raw material, direct labor, factory overhead. What we'll find out is in later videos is we need to take these costs. That's in total. Okay, so these are all in total. But that doesn't do me any good, because if I put 100 of these items in the inventory, I need to know how much each one of those items cost us on a per unit basis. Now if we only made one product, it would be simple. We would just take this cost of goods manufactured and we would divide it by those number of units. But if we're making different products, we need to look at a job costing sheet, and we can talk about that in a later video. I wanted to go through some other terms with you to help you understand it. When we say direct material or raw material and direct labor, these costs are direct, meaning we can trace those. There's no question about it. If I build a desk for Mrs. Smith, how much wood we put into that desk and how long it took my furniture makers to actually construct that. So we've got that. The other one, factory overhead, is called indirect. Okay. And those are indirect because we cannot trace it. If I made a desk, there's no way I can look at that desk and say, here's how much overhead lighting it absorbed, here's how much insurance it absorbed, so I'm stuck with having to allocate those. Okay? So you have direct, we can trace it; indirect, we cannot trace it. These are also called, these two, labor and factory overhead, are called, I'm sorry, I apologize for that interruption. So here we have conversion costs, and that is the direct labor and factory overhead, because that's what it takes to convert this raw material into our finished product. Okay. All of these, let's get a different color out here, these are all three of these are called product costs, because those are the three costs that go into a finished product, and that's as opposed to period costs where we expense those immediately, like rent. Those are general and administrative type of expenses, not anything to do with the factory. All right. They're also called manufacturing costs. So manufacturing costs, product costs go hand in hand. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. We need to figure out how to get these total cost of goods manufactured over to a per unit cost in our inventory. We also need to look at how we're going to allocate this factory overhead or manufacturing burden. Again, that's a whole video in and of itself. So I hope that helped clear up a little bit about how this manufacturing process works and how we get these three costs. And what we'll do is in a later videos, we'll take a look at some of these other things like allocation of the overhead and how do we get things on a per unit basis. So thank you for viewing, and again, I hope that was some help in understanding how this whole process works. And hopefully I'll see you in the next, well, I won't see you, but hopefully you'll see me in our next video. Thanks.